Lynn, this next question comes from someone here in Washington who is someone you know well and who has functioned as someone who works as, he's long been part of the overall institution of the presidency. He says, Lynn, obviously I approach this question with the admission that I was never an Obama supporter, and looking back, I'm beginning to think that it was against my better judgment that I was willing to support him after he won the Democratic nomination. In truth, I must tell you that I am absolutely furious, and I'm growing more furious by the day. Our president chooses to present himself as the great reformer, as the president who will say the things that no one else wants to say, who will get tough, and who will speak on behalf of the American people. But the fact of the matter is that this administration has yet to place the blame where it belongs. And there is absolutely no indication that they have any intention of doing so. Because if the president was inclined to do that, he would, in fact, stop coddling failed banks with billions of dollars of money that none of us have any access to. I actually can't read what this says. It is something about figuring out where the money goes. He says he also would not allow these banks and brokerage houses to give their executives lavish bonuses when millions of Americans are out of work. But really, most significantly, he would not populate his administration with various individuals who are products of the system that he claims he wishes to reform. And that brings me to the question of old Larry Summers. You know, when it came out this past week that Larry received over $5 million last year working for a $30 billion hedge fund, and that he did that showing up for work only one day a week, when it came out that he got another $3 million in cash from the very beneficiaries of the bailout that he has promoted, it really brought up for me a very clear point, and that is that if anything like that had happened during the 8 years that Bill Clinton was president, that individual would have been out on his ass. And this is not secret information, nor is it secret that Larry has always been completely infatuated with derivatives and these other exotic financial instruments that have gotten us to where we are right now. Yet, there's Larry, top economic advisor to President Obama, the guy who coordinates what information gets through, what analysis gets through, and how the president is briefed on the current collapse. Now, President Obama is no economist. So, when he turns to his top advisor and he says, Larry, how did we get into this mess? What do you think Larry Summers is going to say? Is he going to attack the people who pay the bulk of his salary? Is he going to argue for regulation when he is known as the principal deregulator who operated during the Clinton presidency? When President Obama, who is no economist, turns to his chief economic advisor and says, hey, Larry, who the hell recommended repeal of Glass-Steagall anyway? Do you really think that Larry is going to confess? Somehow, I don't think he is. The president clearly is not an economist. That was obvious when he traveled to London. And there he was, standing next to Gordon Brown. And he was asked what or who was to blame for the current financial crisis. Barack Obama is an incredibly glib speaker. Yet, this usually eloquent public spokesman for the United States responded with a rambling, incomprehensible answer. Now, I could be optimistic and say it's really not the president's fault. Larry Summers is the guy who's briefing him every day. Therefore, it's hardly surprising that the president doesn't have the whole picture and that the president doesn't understand what's going on. If that were the case, I'd be upset, but I wouldn't be furious. Lynn, the bottom line is that Larry Summers is Larry Summers. But Larry Summers is not the president. Barack Obama is. And while I do know what Larry Summers thinks, my greatest fear is not that Larry Summers is misinforming the president, but that the fact of the matter is that Larry Summers is telling the president precisely what the president wishes to hear. And if that's the case, then firing Larry Summers, something that I don't disagree with, will not solve anything. Because the bottom line is that Larry Summers does not seem to be the problem. President Obama, on the other hand, does seem to be the problem. And frankly, I do not know how to begin to address that.
Well, there are a lot of things you could say about that. You know, I said that essentially when you have the case of Larry Summers and Geithner, I described that as Mephistopheles and his Faust. That's essentially what it is. They're both fakers. Now, you say Larry Summers would say this, if you saw him speaking. That's what he does. He first funny things with gestures. He goes into a whole business of gestures intended to intimidate and distract the audience. While you look at it, what he's saying nothing. The whole thing is a fraud. No, it's true. But you've got to understand the other thing. That when you criticize the president, you've got to see clearly, as it became very clear to me when I saw the evidence, this guy is a Narcissus case. Specifically, he maps in history on the profile of the Emperor Nero, who was put into power by his mother, who he later killed, who was educated by Seneca, who he tried to kill in several successive ways before the job was finally done, and who understood nothing. A true Narcissus case, like Nero, is not concerned with reality. He's concerned with his illusion. He lives really in a fantasy life. And the only way you can deal with him as president, and I've indicated what the problem is about removing him as president, but you have to put him in an environment where the environment refuses to allow those games to be played. You stick in a position. See, he's not unintelligent. He's got the mechanism of intelligence, but he has no moral criteria. That is the Narcissus case, like an Emperor Nero, has no intrinsic moral character. Yet what they have, the Narcissus has a self-image. And what he tries always to do is not to avoid collision with the self-image, as he's crafted it. So he wants to see himself as always powerful, a genius, everything else. He's a guy who's a quick study. He's a facile asset. A quick study. He's a chameleon. And you imagine, what does a chameleon think about himself when he's going through what does a chameleon think when he's standing on a Scotch plaid? And that's your problem with this type of person. This guy is very specific type of personality. All the evidence is conclusive. You don't have to get into anything more than we know now. It's there. This is a Narcissus which maps onto the image of a Narcissus type such as the Emperor Nero. If you keep him in the way he's being kept in now, he's going to be that type. That's where he's going. That's what his character is showing you. If, on the other hand, you put him in a position where he's treated as a boy, who's allowed to play certain games but not others, then he will wait until he has his opportunity to strike, as Nero would strike. So to deal with the problem, you have to worry you worry about sometimes too much the wrong things. I understand the anger. But you have to worry about our institutions of the presidency, which is what I worry about. As long as he's in control of his position, with that retinue on which he depends. Remember, he depends on a very specific group of people, which is identified essentially by the Time magazine report. That's his personality. That's the truth. You are who you eat. You are what you're fed to be. He's fed to be a Narcissus type of this type. Don't feed him. Don't feed the disease. And he's forced then to attempt to assimilate himself into a position where he's credible. Remove the credibility of the other thing. Because our problem is that we're not governed. This nation is not governed. There's been a total breakdown of the government of this nation under this jerk we had for two terms. Fortunately, we escaped the other great danger, a Gore. A Gore as president would be the worst possible affliction you could imagine. You've got a slime ball as a Narcissus. I mean, that would be really something bad. So the point is, we should not focus too much on the personality. We have to focus on the personality from a clinical standpoint. But our concern is the fact that we don't have a government. Look at all these senators. People ask questions today. Look at others who are comparable to that. What's the characteristic of it? They're not asking the question. How do you get a government to replace non-government? What kind of a government do we require to deal with this situation? They're like dealing in a debater's club kind of situation. On the terms posed of the questions posed. Not dealing with the reality. My concern is we don't have a world system in which humanity can live. We don't have a U.S. government on which this nation can live. I don't give a damn about Obama or anybody else as an individual in that sense. I'm concerned about this nation. I'm concerned about the future generations of humanity. And the great threat is not Obama. You're not going to find a scapegoat and solve your problem. The real problem is this nation does not have a capability of self-government. And I'm determined to try to find a way to create the competence of self-government. Europe has no competent self-government. Russia has a self-government crisis. China has a self-government crisis. India doesn't have a big export business, so it doesn't have a big self-government problem. Most of the world is suffering. The whole planet's in agony. It's about to break down. We're headed for a holocaust on this whole planet as a result of this thing. I'm not concerned about an individual as being the problem. They may be a problem, but the problem is defined in a context. And the reason we have the problem is because we don't have a functioning government. And Europe doesn't have a functioning government. And most of the world doesn't have a functioning government. And that's what we come to. I come from a time in my age when I have known conditions under which we had actual governments. I've known a time when the United States government meant something. It doesn't mean anything anymore as a government. It's a reflection of incompetence. Rub two incompetence together and call it government. I'm concerned about what should be there, which Obama is not. Obama is not the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. He's a symptom of the problem that we no longer have the ability to govern ourselves as a nation. And I'm just hoping that the angry people, and they are angry out there, and some of these people in the Congress aren't listening. Those people out there are angry. The 80% of the population out there is angry. They have no future, and they know it. And they're angry about it. And people in positions of leadership aren't concerned about that. They're concerned about what the rich feel, or what the would-be rich feel. Not about the nation, not about humanity. They don't give a damn about Africa. They'll talk about how they're pro-African. Bunk. I'm involved in Africa. They're not there. Look at our own country. They're not there. They don't care. What about the people who are losing health care in the United States? Do you know how many deaths that means? Do you know what kind of suffering that means? What's being done about that? That's your problem. Take all these problems of this type, the economic problem, the health care problem, the education problem, the drug problem. What does it all add up to? One thing. We don't have a government. We have an administration of some foreign power, probably from Mars or someplace like that.